Good morning and welcome to Bay Area Impact, a continuing series of webinars the Bay Area Council is hosting to explore some of our regions and states' most pressing and timely issues. I'm Gwen Litvak, Senior Vice President for Public Policy here at the Bay Area Council. We're going to be focusing on one of California's most ambitious infrastructure projects ever, building the nation's first high-speed rail system linking Los Angeles to the Bay Area. It promises to create exciting new transportation connections across our state, support California's bold climate change agenda, and generate transformative new economic opportunities. But very few things in California come without major challenges or obstacles. From political and community resistance to funding shortages and dealing with the monumental complexities of a project never attempted before in the US, the challenges for high-speed rail are immense. Still, progress is being made. We'll get an update in a moment on where things currently stand, and we'll dive into upcoming milestones and what key challenges are next. In particular, we're going to focus on the importance of high-speed rail in connecting the Bay Area and Silicon Valley region with the Central Valley and the incredible economic, environmental, and social opportunities that can come from that connection. We've got an incredible group of leaders to guide us through this conversation. Joining us is former Secretary of Transportation and co-chair of the U.S. High-Speed Rail Coalition, Ray LaHood, California High-Speed Rail Authority CEO, Brian Kelly, California Transportation Commission Chair and Fresno Economic Development Corporation CEO, Leanne Eager, and HNTB Senior Vice President, Darlene G. I also want to welcome longtime high-speed rail champion, Kathleen Gagali, who has joined us. We'll hear a few words from each speaker on their role in the project, then we'll dive into some prepared questions and also answer your questions. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. Let's start with Brian Kelly and hear a quick progress report on this massive and complex project that he is leading. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to discuss the project and its status. We have just released, just 10 months after releasing our prior business plan, we've put out our draft business plan for 2022. And in that plan, we outline where we are and where we're headed next. We highlight important progress we're making on the project. I think as most people know, we are under construction right now on the 119 miles in the Central Valley. We are now turning the corner to the second half of that work, which is exciting for us. We're starting to see that first construction segment down there should be completed in the next 11 months, which is what we call CP4. It's the southernmost stretch of that 119-mile stretch. And then the other two, we're working through some commercial issues with the contractor on CPs 1 and 2, 3, and we'll settle those to get all the scope finalized early this spring, and then we will push through that work and complete that in the next couple of years. So that's what's in front of us on the construction side. Our pitch here is the same as it's been. Because we are building those assets in the Central Valley, we're putting a premium on putting those assets to use, and that means getting electrified high-speed rail operating in California. We don't think the 119 miles by itself is the best operational run, so the governor has proposed to extend us what I call out of the orchards and into the cities by connecting with the city of Merced, Fresno, and Bakersfield in the Central Valley. It's about a 175-mile operating stretch. We want to work to get that done and operational by the end of the decade is our goal and what we're striving for now. And at the same time, so that's, part one is use the assets we have under construction to get electrified high-speed rail going. Then concurrently with that, finish all of the environmental clearances for the entire 500-mile stretch from San Francisco all the way to Anaheim. And on that, I'm very happy to report we're making great progress. We have cleared 4 more segments in the last 2 years. We have now cleared about 300 miles of that 500-mile stretch. And by July of this year, we'll have cleared 430 miles of that stretch. And that's really important because once we clear the environmental, I am pushing for us then moving further on getting more design work done on every segment where the environmental's done. And that enables us to map and identify all the right-of-way needs map and identify electric utilities that need to be moved, and enter into the important local agreements or third-party agreements on what we're going to need to get in place before we enter those next construction contracts. And it's really important that we do it right. We have the opportunity now to be thorough, be methodical, and make sure that we get all the pre-construction work done before we enter into construction contracts. I think that's one of the biggest lessons learned about where we started, what we've been living with because of a tough start. But I really believe we're turning the corner. As I said, one of our construction packages is about 3/4, 80% done now. The other two are about half, turning the corner to the end of those things. All that scope is now finalized, and that's been blurry for some time, but it no longer is. And so I see us at the turning point of real important advancement. And, the reality for the project, and I think, setting expectations is right here. This is going to be an expensive endeavor to build all the way from San Francisco to LA and Anaheim, probably on the order of around $100 billion. But all of that said, it is a bargain compared with trying to get mobility benefits through expanding highways and expanding airports that will cost twice as much, and will not lead to the environmental benefits that this project delivers. And so even at that cost, my view is it is a good investment for the future of the state. It's the right kind of transportation investment in the era of climate change. And it's exactly what we promised to deliver in the bond bill. And it's ultimately what we should keep striving to get done. So that's sort of a thumbnail of where we are, where I think we need to be heading. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. I think we're going to go around and get comments from each of our speakers first, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions for you in the later half. Secretary LaHood, please share with us your current involvement in HighSpeed Rail and why HighSpeed Rail is important for California and why it's particularly important to connect the Bay Area and the Central Valley.
Well, thank you for organizing the meeting, and a big thanks to Brian Kelly and his entire team and the board for continuing the effort that we started back in 2009 when President Obama had a vision for implementing high-speed rail in America. For the first time in the history of the country, there was $8 billion for high-speed rail, and California received the lion's share of that money because of the leadership of Governor Brown, of the Assembly, of the leadership of the Assembly, and of the leadership of the high-speed rail enthusiasts all over California who had been dreaming and planning and plotting for high-speed rail in California. And so more than a year ago, I was invited by the High-Speed Rail Coalition to be one of the co-chairs to lead an effort to persuade Congress to include additional high-speed rail money in the Build Back Better program. Also in the transportation bill, the $1 trillion transportation bill that passed Congress, there's a huge amount of money, millions of dollars for high-speed rail and also for existing rail. And so when I learned of the effort in California to really step up the opportunity to continue the progress that Brian and his team and his board have made, I wanted to be a part of today, and I wanted to be a part of continuing the momentum that has begun in California, which is a model, frankly, for other states in terms of how you implement high-speed rail in a state like California. This all fits very well into President Biden's agenda for a clean, green environment. It fits very well into the plans that Governor Brown and Governor Newsom have had for a long time for making sure that California is the most environmentally improved state in the country, and they're well on their way to doing that with a high-speed rail program. We've had some success in Washington. Our coalition has done well, and we wanted to be a part of continuing the momentum in California. Anything that we can do to lend our support to your effort, Brian, to your team's effort, to your board's effort, to get the money that's needed now to continue the progress for high-speed rail in California, we will do. The High-Speed Rail Coalition is committed to doing all we can to be helpful to you. We're also committed to getting over the finish line, the $10 billion that California, frankly, will benefit from if that money is included. We believe there'll be separate bills. There probably won't be one Build Back Better bill that's passed, but there will be certainly a bill that's passed for environmental funding, and we hope the 10 billion for high-speed rail will be included in that. So whatever we can do as a high-speed rail coalition, we will do that. As one of the co-chairs, I'm committing the other co-chairs, our entire group, to doing all we can to being helpful in California as we continue our work in Washington to provide the additional funding to carry out President Obama's original vision for high-speed rail all over America. Thank you for including me, and happy to stick around and answer any questions.
Thank you, Secretary. Honored and of the California Transportation Commission. Chair Eager is also the president and CEO of the Fresno County Economic Development Corporation. Your thoughts on the importance of high-speed rail to California and what is now and into the future.
Great, thank you so much. And I certainly want to thank the Bay Area Council for including me in this panel. I want to say a special thank you to Secretary LaHood. We were talking earlier about his visit to Fresno back, I think it was 2010. I think you brought that great big giant $3 billion check. I don't know that we got to put it in the bank, but we certainly appreciated your support from the very beginning of this high-speed rail journey that California has been on. You know, you were talking about the folks who have been plotting. I think I've been one of those plotters for many, many years. Being from the Central Valley and looking at transportation in general, I think I've always said that here in Fresno County in the Central Valley, we're sort of this island unto ourselves, and you just really can't get anywhere from here unless you get on a freeway. Now with my new hat on, that brings certainly a more intense view of what we should and should not be doing in the state of California. But getting people off of our freeways and onto public transportation has always been a goal in the Central Valley, and high-speed rail is certainly the way that we can get from Northern and Southern California and not have to get on those freeways. Personally, I have been, and I think now we're at about 10 different countries and 26 different high-speed rail stations with my economic development hat on and traveling to those countries, looking at what transportation does for economic development and economic vitality. High-speed rail in those countries has transformed communities. My very first trip was to Spain, and that really was to look at the Spanish system of high-speed rail. We went from Madrid to Sevilla, which I think is about almost Fresno to Los Angeles, sort of around there, maybe San Francisco. And we looked at what that did for the community because it was fairly new at the time. And they did put another interim stop in between to a smaller community. It transformed those communities immediately. As soon as those stations went in, as soon as people were able to get on those trains and go from one to the other, companies were able to grow in both of the ends and also the middle. People were able to get on the train and get to their work and different places around the country. You know, I think you probably all remember, and Brian, I think you were a part of looking at those studies at the beginning when everybody said, oh my gosh, high-speed rail is going to do all these horrible things, right? You know, in the Central Valley, we're not going to be able to grow anything anymore. And, you know, the cow's milk is going to go sour. If you remember all of those things that people said at the beginning. And of course, I took pictures when I was in Spain, going down the road of, you know, the cows right next to the train. They never even looked up at us. And certainly we have all proven over the years, all of those fallacies were not true. HighSpeed Rail, we have ways to be able to mitigate all of those issues that people were afraid of at the beginning. But for me, making sure that the Central Valley is that lifeblood of California. I know, Brian, you talked about getting out of the orchards. We certainly are looking at what does that do to change the economic climate in the valley. We want to diversify. We don't want to be that place anymore that people talk about as the Appalachia of the West. We don't want any of that anymore. We want to be able to connect to Silicon Valley. And, we actually have some of the programs now, and thank you so much, Bay Area, for joining us in those valley to valley connections. If you have a company in Silicon Valley and you don't have room to grow anymore, or you want to be able to manufacture something someplace else, having the Central Valley as that connection will certainly look at better alternatives than manufacturing it someplace in the Midwest and getting on that train, getting on that high-speed rail, and being able to be downtown Fresno in an hour and a half, so that folks who are working there can also work in the valley at the same time and go back and forth. We have looked at this for 12 years now, Secretary LaHood. I think we're oldest living high-speed rail advocates here, looking at how this is going to work in the future and all of the new and innovative ways. Now, California has always been known as the state that has innovation, that's adventurous, looking at what we need to do differently. The first high-speed rail in the entire country has to be in California, and we can make it work. Right, Brian? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Eager. Last but of course not least, I'd like to welcome Darlene G. from HNTB. Darlene, can you please share your thoughts on HNTB's role in high-speed rail and the potential you see high-speed rail having for business and economic growth?
Thank you, Gwen. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. Currently, HNTB is supporting the authority in the environmental clearance of the San Francisco to San Jose and the San Jose to Merced sections. We're also providing the project construction management oversight for CP4, which Brian mentioned is the most southerly end of the intended early operating section. We're pleased to be doing that. All is going well, and we're very happy to be able to support the authority in this vision. Also, recently, HNTB has renewed our full commitment to the U.S. High-Speed Rail Coalition. Very proud to be here today with my fellow Illinoisan, Secretary LaHood. And we encourage all of our fellow Bay Area Council members to consider joining the High-Speed Rail Coalition. It is incredibly important that we move this all forward, and it is going to take all of us to make sure that that happens. California High-Speed Rail, as Gwen just mentioned, is going to open, and everyone has talked about, is going to open numerous options for connectivity and mobility in the state. And we at HNTB are extremely excited about being involved in the interrelationship of mobility, housing, the economy that is so critical to our state. And lastly, I would just comment that transformative infrastructure has always been fraught with huge challenges that people forget once it's all done. I believe if you ask most people in California whether the Golden Gate Bridge should have been built, they would be astonished at that question and in today's world. And yet at the time, it was incredibly fraught with challenges that almost kept it from happening. So today, I think it's important that we all stick together with being persistent in delivering a vision of this infrastructure, which is going to be so critical for our future. Thank you. And I'm very pleased to be able to help answer questions today.
Thank you so much. Why don't we start with you, Brian? You mentioned the 2022 business plan and how that should speed up project completion a little bit. Are you able to dive more into the specific details? I know the folks on our Zoom room here are probably interested in how the project is back on track and some of the more details around pre-construction that you mentioned.
Well, I think importantly, what we're doing to move things along, some of it's articulated in the plan and some of it is just in our daily work here at the authority. For example, we've committed entirely and fully to moving through those environmental documents statewide. And that's really important to get those done because once you establish that framework, you clarify where you're going, you've worked with the communities on identifying impacts and mitigating those impacts, then we're able to move to the next stage of design, extend that design out further, be able to really map right away, develop a right away procurement plan, move forward on identifying utilities that need to move. And it enables us to set exactly what we're doing and then move forward on all the important pre-construction things that need to be done before you get into those next construction contracts. And there's no doubt that we have to go find money for some of these extensions outside of the valley. But I'd like to get all that pre-construction work done as soon as we can, because I think one of the big lessons learned for us here is, let's identify all the risk early. Let's retire as much of that risk as we can before we get to the next stage of letting a procurement contract of some kind. So that's really what we're dedicated to. I'm happy to say, as I mentioned earlier, advancing the environmental work. My board has approved at our last board meeting the advanced design work for the extensions to Merced and Bakersfield. We are looking at extending the design work for the station in downtown Merced. And so these are things that my board has now opened the door for that RFQ to advance. And that will enable us again to know more sooner, identify challenges sooner, and put together the plans for how we will move the project forward well before we enter new construction contracts. So those are a couple of examples, again, getting the Enviro done, working through the things we're working through on the advanced design work. And I would just lastly say a really keen focus on getting all the scope to absolute finalization in the construction segment so we can get that done and manage to a finish. And so those are three areas where I think I'm most proud of how we're moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. I noticed that we have a comment from former HighSpeed Rail CEO Jeff Morales. Jeff, thanks so much for joining. Leanne, he has pointed out that you can attest to the near-term economic benefits of investment. And I was going to ask a question similar around political support. And so Leanne, I'll ask you. The political support has been mixed for HighSpeed Rail. So what do you think it will change? What do you think it will take to change that? And what does that mean for getting this done?
Was that one for me?
Yes.
Getting people on a train, getting the trains on the track. We looked for a long time about, gosh, do you continue building? And I just have to say, for anyone who has not driven down the 99 to look at what's being built in the Central Valley, I think I had someone in Los Angeles not very long ago saying, gosh, I wish HighSpeed Rail would actually start building something. You got to come to my neighborhood and look at what's being built there. But I think it's a little bit difficult for people to get their mind around how that's different from Amtrak, how that's going to be different than what we have now. So I do think it's really important. And I think Jeff and Brian both really had the plan in place that as soon as we can get a train on a track, as soon as we can have people see what that's like to go from whether it's Bakersfield to Merced and then on up to the Bay Area, they're going to see that life-changing experience that HighSpeed Rail can give. And yes, the political atmosphere about, gosh, where do we put these precious dollars in the state of California? And is it more important to put them, in Northern California or Southern California? It's important to put them everywhere. And, starting the HighSpeed Rail in the Central Valley, I think everybody understands that if there's one part of California that's not doing well, that's not good for anybody in the state of California, and what the economic impact has been in the Central Valley of putting people to work, of people, the thousands of workers, and not just the people who are doing the construction there, but all the ancillary businesses. In the Central Valley, we have certainly looked at our poverty rates coming down. We've certainly looked at our unemployment coming down. And while HighSpeed Rail is not the only piece of that, it's certainly one of those pieces. We can point to now all these thousands of people that are working and buying things. You know, at the beginning of HighSpeed Rail, that's first section where the EDC in Fresno helped move 350 businesses off that alignment. So many of them, and we only lost 2, by the way. I just want to make sure everybody knows that. We only lost 2, and they wanted to retire anyway. So many businesses really looked at growing. They were able to expand in this process. One of the things that we were looking at too is as they were looking to expand, that promise of HighSpeed Rail in the future, of what that would look like if they can get from different areas of the state of California, but be centralized in the valley where it's still affordable. That's really important. And so that economic impact that it's having in the Central Valley will continue as it grows out to other areas. So certainly when we're looking at what does that mean for Northern and Southern California, once we get in your neighborhood, you'll be able to see how that does change the economic vitality, and it will change the economic mobility of the people of the state of California.
Thank you. My next question is for Secretary LaHood. So Secretary, there are $36 billion in federal funds for high-speed rail from the recently passed transportation package, and $12 billion, as I'm sure you know, are required to be spent outside of the Northeast corridor. How do you think California high-speed rail is positioned to compete for those funds?
Well, first of all, I think the fact that the state has worked so hard to make this project possible under 2 different administrations, beginning with Governor Brown and now with Governor Newsom, and the fact that you haven't skipped a beat, the fact that you have the California Assembly passing a huge amount of money earlier on. I think the commitment from the elected officials has been extraordinary. And that means that this is a viable project. And that means that the money that's been spent has been well spent. And that means that when the federal government, through the Department of Transportation, is looking for places to invest in rail, California will be top on the list because of all of the progress that you have made. And we are going to continue to work very hard on a pot of money, $10 billion dedicated to high-speed rail. It's already passed one house of the Congress. We've had extraordinary leadership from Speaker Pelosi, from Leader Schumer, from President Biden and his entire team at the White House. That's the reason that we have been successful. And that's the reason I'm optimistic that our coalition will work hard on whatever bills are passed to include the 10 billion, which will benefit California immensely, and as well as the millions of dollars that were included in the transportation bill, the $1 trillion transportation bill. You are as well positioned as any state in the country to receive significant federal dollars. You need to keep the momentum going. You need to make sure that people hang together, whether it's the Assembly, whether it's the governor's office, whether it's Brian and his entire team at the California High-Speed Rail organization. You're on your way, and I don't think there's anything that can stop you except divisions. And I don't see those right now, because I think everyone's talking to one another. People are listening to one another. And this is what has to continue in order for California to get over the finish line with high-speed rail.
Thank you. Darlene, I will ask you our next question, and others feel free to jump in if you have more to add on this. Can someone talk about the actual travel times between different cities that will be possible once high-speed rail system is up and running?
Gwen, I think I would prefer Brian answer that.
Of course, of
I want
course.
to make sure that everyone has the right information.
Yeah,
Yes, Brian, let's start with you there.
thank you. I'm happy to jump in on that. I mean, look, why electrified high-speed rail? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the primary reasons is that because of the speed you can attain, it shrinks the state. I mean, instead of driving from San Francisco to Fresno in 4+ hours, you could take a train and get there in about an hour and 20 minutes, right? You can, instead of getting on the conventional rail available in California today and travel from Southern California to the Bay Area in what is today a 12 or 13-hour train ride, we can do it in around 3 hours. And when you think about that, getting back to what some of the things that Leanne mentioned, being a job center like the Bay Area is, with very high housing costs, the idea that that job center can offer housing to places a little bit further away, but you can get there through a clean, fast alternative like high-speed rail, making that commute pattern an hour and some change instead of 4 hours by car on choked freeways. It's a game changer. And also, as Leanne said, there may be reasons to develop satellite offices that are not necessarily in the Bay Area, but located in the Valley. And the entire vision for this from day one was this idea of connecting California in a way that is not connected today. The Bay Area and LA are a little bit, they're international centers, rightly so, and the Valley is a little bit of an island between them. And but as an agricultural powerhouse on a global scale. And so what high-speed rail was designed to do, and the reason that we're not bypassing the Central Valley, is that we're trying to connect these vibrant communities, both the Bay Area to the Central Valley, and then back out to the coastal Southern California area. We think that's good for commerce. We think that's good for affordable housing options. We think that's good for, as I said, just connecting the community that is California and making more dynamic the economic opportunities in the Valley. And so those are all the things that we're doing. The travel times, by themselves, to me, are the most exciting part of the technology. I mean, the idea, again, traveling at 220 miles per hour, we're never going to build enough freeway lanes to allow that to occur, and so the idea that you can do that and cut these travel times is one of the most exciting things about it. And I think what makes it a good mobility choice for travelers. Just, one, I'll never forget, I'll just relay this story and then move on. But I was back in 2013, I was in Spain and I traveled on their high-speed rail system from Madrid to Barcelona, which is a little shorter than the San Francisco to LA run. But we did that. It's the equivalent of about 325 miles along, something along that order. And we did the train ride in 2 hours and 25 minutes. I'll just never forget when we arrived in Barcelona, the former Caltrans director, Will Kempton, was sitting next to me on the train. And he just looked at me and said, "Man, we are so far behind. We are so far behind. Why is this option not available to Californians?" And that's what we're trying to do. And, as I said earlier, got off to a bit of a bumpy start. I think we're righting that now. I think we're turning the corner on a lot of those issues. And we have a plan going forward. The most important part, we have a plan going forward to really make sure we don't repeat important and necessary lessons that we've learned. And so we're going to put those in place and not repeat sort of prior mistakes that are just things you learn the hard way sometimes. But we did that, and now we move forward. And so
Gwen, can I just jump in here? There's
Of course, please.
There's two other auxiliary issues here that cannot be understated. Number one are the jobs.
Yeah.
The creation of thousands of jobs for the people who are not only building the rail, and really, whether it's engineers, whether it's architects, whether it's the people that are doing the hard work actually building the system, these are good paying jobs over a long period of time. And then the jobs that'll be created for the people who will operate the system. That's number one. Number two, we said for 4.5 years while we were at DOT, if you build it, they will come. And I can cite you so many projects, whether they be bus lanes, whether they be transit systems, whether they be rail, where you build it, and what happens is economic development occurs immediately. Businesses, mostly small businesses, who create the lion's share of the jobs in our country and the lion's share of the jobs in California, are created. So it's not only the jobs for the people who are building the rail and operating the rail once it's open, but it's the jobs that are created all along the corridor, whether it's the sandwich shops, whether it's the building of businesses all along the corridor. It will be an economic boon to California, and that just simply cannot be understated.
Very much so. Secretary LaHood, while I have you here, another question for you, please, which is, as a former Republican, what arguments do you think can be most effective in convincing today's Republican Party, though I should add, some Democrats also need convincing, to support funding for high-speed rail?
I think what I just said, I think the job creation, the Republican Party has always been about small business, encouraging small business, supporting big business, and no better way to do that. As a Republican who served in Congress for 14 years on the Transportation Committee, I can tell you the biggest beneficiary of this project will be the building trades, will be the workers, will be the people that build it. But the second beneficiary will be the small businesses and other businesses that will be located along this corridor. And frankly, the third part of it, which may not be as big on the Republican agenda as it is on the Democratic agenda, is the environmental advantages that will occur as a result of people hopping on a train and not in their automobile. And as we see gasoline prices soaring, which they will do again at some point, people can save an awful lot of money by getting on a train rather than their automobile, having to fill up at $5 a gallon, which people are obviously doing in some parts of the country now. And this is a huge boon for the citizens of California, for the businesses of California, for the workers of California. It's another example where the money doesn't stay in Washington. It goes back to hardworking people who are doing the jobs building, to the small businesses that are creating the jobs. And it's a win-win for America. High-speed rail is a win-win for America and a win-win for California.
Thank you. We have a number of good questions from Carla Mays about equity, and I'll try to summarize them all. And for whomever wants to take this, can you say a bit about California high-speed rail equity framework, or how you're addressing equity throughout the project writ large?
Brian probably can answer that best.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of, in kind of everything we do, inherent in the culture of what we're doing is, an effort on diversity and equity. And, the place it starts for me is where we're focusing our efforts. It was stated earlier, Central Valley is one of the more disadvantaged communities in California, has been historically, had a high poverty rate, and some of the worst air quality in the country. And I think first, getting a system like this operational there, providing the economic opportunity, not just with the construction jobs, but once we're operational, the ability of the communities to expand economic development around the stations we'll be building in the valley, making sure that our ticket, obviously our ticket prices are going to be, competitive, but then operating a system through the valley that is no longer diesel-based, diesel-emitting rail, but is now an electrified system that is based on, or the source of the power is renewable power. I mean, this is a game changer for people in the valley. The estimate that we have is we cut the travel time in that segment between Merced and Bakersfield by some 90 to 100 minutes versus driving a car or conventional rail there. And I think, you'll see more and more people take that opportunity. We also are diverse and making sure that we're providing dynamic opportunity for companies of different size and scale and scope participate in this project. We have more than 653 small businesses working on the project now, including disabled veteran businesses and disadvantaged businesses that are all part of what we're doing. And so there's that. And then importantly, and Leanne has done a great job partnering with us and the local labor unions in the Valley, where we are providing workforce training opportunities in places like Fresno and Selma and beyond, where all of this is about concentrating and providing opportunity in places where opportunities have not existed. And so all of that to me is part of the equity question and the equity issue that is important, part of our culture and what we're doing going forward.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Brian, because I unmuted myself before you mentioned the workforce training, because I was going to jump in and talk about HighSpeed Rail is funding a workforce training program in one of the smaller cities, rural cities in the Central Valley in Selma. And it really is aimed at folks who need the jobs the most. So these are people who have been left behind in other areas. They haven't been able to join other workforce training. They haven't been able to get the jobs on their own. And so we really looked at that underserved population. And for those of you in the Bay Area, we modeled it after the Mandela Center. We took a tour of the Mandela Center, I think 10, 12 years ago, and said, oh man, we got to do that. And so HighSpeed Rail partnered with us to get that started. And I have to also acknowledge that in the appropriations bill that just passed, Congressman Costa was able to get us about $2 million to help build a new facility, training facility, focused on transportation and high-speed rail in the western part of Fresno County, to be able to really get more and more people involved in workforce in transportation and high-speed rail. We think that the thousands of jobs that are coming, and we know how difficult it is for every business to be able to find appropriate workforce that's been trained. HighSpeed Rail has been a wonderful partner in looking at those equity issues. How is it we get people a chance to work on this project that never would have a chance before? And so thank you, Brian. And if Jeff's on the phone still, thank you for getting this into the Valley, into the folks who need those jobs desperately. And thank you, Congressman Costa. I know his staff is on here too, for continuing to look at how do we make sure across the state of California that people who need the jobs the most are able to get them.
Thank you both. And Leanne, I'll actually start with you on the next question, but open it up to anyone who also wants to comment on it. I've seen a few questions in the chat about hybrid work and remote work. The Bay Area Council has run our return to transit survey for almost a year now, and consistently we're seeing employers and employees having a preference to come to the office 3 days a week. Of course, we don't know what will happen in the future, but that looks like the preferences. Do you have thoughts about how the valley-to-valley connection will be beneficial given the new shift towards remote work?
Sure, and certainly there are industries that remote work is going to work forever, and we learned that over the last 2 years. And being able to live and work in the Valley and having the home office in Silicon Valley certainly proves out. One of the things that we're doing in the Central Valley is starting to train more and more people on remote work. A lot of folks, we sent them home, right, 2 years ago and said, you're only going to be home for 2 weeks. Don't worry, you don't need to do anything. And then here we are 2 years later, still looking at how do we train folks for those jobs. So we are working with Fresno County Economic Development Organization and the Bay Area Council on what is it that those businesses in the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley need from the people in the Central Valley. How do we make sure that people are trained for those jobs? The other piece is if you have a business in the Bay Area and you want to continue to grow, and you bring part of your business, that second office, I think we were calling it for a while, you bring that second office to the Central Valley and have folks working remotely from there, that certainly works moving forward. But the other piece, we have to always keep in mind, there are going to be industries that you have to go in, and manufacturing is one of those. And so we want to remind people, if you want to manufacture products and you're there in the Bay Area and you need a different place to manufacture products, you can certainly do that in the Central Valley. For we never say it's cheaper. We never say that get a deal for coming to the Valley, but it's certainly affordable to do that work in the Central Valley. And HighSpeed Rail's going to certainly move that forward in being able to have two offices at the same time.
Thanks. Others on that question, or happy to move on to the next?
Just real quickly, Gwen, I would add, I totally agree with the perspective that Leanne and Brian raised. I mean, as a member of the private sector that looks to our workforce to be collaborative, even though hybrid work is probably here to stay, as everyone believes, I don't think anyone believes that we aren't going to want to get together. We aren't going to want to collaborate. And I think in so many of the knowledge sectors that we need, there is this driving need for much more talent, much more intercollaboration. And I think, HighSpeed Rail just opens up so much that's been touched on in housing and the ability to, have other locations to expand our horizons. And I think as the private sector, we really see that as a huge opportunity. So I think, all of the points that have been raised are just incredibly valid.
Thank you, Darlene. Brian, I'm seeing lots of questions in the chat about project delivery methods, inflation costs, cost controls. Anything you can share with us about strategies you've thought about, which I'm certain that you've thought much about moving forward?
I'm getting a lot about inflation, and clearly we're in an inflationary period right now. But our cost estimates are not year-to-year cost estimates. We look over a long horizon. I'm not sure we're going to be in an extended, lengthy period of inflation. We are monitoring it. We will adjust accordingly as we go forward. But remember, our estimates are over a much longer period of time than an annual bump in inflation. It's something to be mindful for. It's something for mindful about. Something for us to monitor as we go forward. And so we're paying attention to it, but we're not hitting the panic mode, and we're not assuming that inflation will be here for a 20-year horizon. I think there's cycles to this, up and down, and we will again continue to monitor and make adjustments as we go. In terms of procurement strategies, look, I don't have. There's a lot of ideology that I notice that comes with procurement, and I would just say that I try to be pragmatic and practical. What I want to do is retire as much risk as I can before I'm getting into a construction contract. And I'm not a huge believer, I'll just say, I'm not a huge believer in the idea that public agencies like mine transfer a bunch of risk to a private entity building it. Because at the end of the day, when there's problems, those problems always come back to the public agency. And I don't think you can ever escape that. Now, that's just my view of it. All of that said, when we get more of the risk behind us, we're ready to do our next procurement contracts. I'm going to look at all kinds of procurement methods: design, bid, build, general construction contract manager. There's several different that I would look at. I generally like the idea of getting the construction, the designer talking sooner rather than later. So there's ways to do that through various procurement methods, not just design, build, but others. I think the thing that was troubling about ours 3 contracts are all huge. They all were design build contracts. And the reality is that a lot of scope changes were made post-contract award. And if you're in a design build environment, that is a nightmare. And so that's the, I came here in 2018, and really since I've been here, it's about understanding all of the scope with commitments made, getting all that scope in the contract, and now managing it as a contract where the scope, schedule, and costs are fully defined. And that's what we're driving toward. And then going forward, it's just making sure that we don't find ourselves in that situation again. And that's what we're doing. That's why I'm optimistic that the past mistakes or the past issues, we will certainly be lessened going forward. And I think we're doing a very good job at being focused on applying all lessons learned. And that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Brian. Secretary LaHood, there's a couple questions about the $10 billion of federal money you mentioned. I just want to clarify. That's nationwide, right? That's not specifically for California?
Nationwide, correct. But
Okay.
California, our coalition has put together a wish list of projects. If the $10 billion is passed by Congress and California is in the mix, that California will receive some of the $10 billion when Congress passes that bill with the high-speed rail. It's dedicated to high-speed rail, $10 billion. It's already passed the House, and we're working very hard now as a coalition to get it through the Senate.
Gwen, can I just comment? Can I comment on
Yeah,
the federal
please, Brian.
picture? Just for a
Please,
minute.
please, please.
It was said earlier that there's 36 billion in federal funding and 12 billion, some amounts going to the Northeast Corridor, leaving a remaining amount. I just want to flag, we see it a little bit differently. The federal bill that passed was historic in its magnitude of investment in transportation. And we identified just 6 pots that we have competed in the past and intend to compete in going forward. And just those 6 pots over the next 5 years, there's on the order of 70 to 75 billion more than the baseline amount in the previous transportation funding package. So we see a pot of, we see 6 various pots that we will be competing in, because our project is both a mega project, which a couple of the pots are focused on, but it's also a project with specific, dynamic elements that certain pots are really good for. For example, I'm building a lot of grade separations, and there's grade separation pots that we would like to play. And candidly, they're not just good for us, but they're good for our partners. Grade separations in the peninsula are good for Caltrain and ultimately good for us. In LA, grade separations in the short term might be good for Metrolink and ultimately be good for us. So we're going to play in all of these pots. And then, as Secretary LaHood pointed out, this 10 billion that's sitting out there in what was the Build Back Better bill and may take on a different moniker going forward, that is a high-speed rail specific pot. And there is no state in the union, better prepared to go take advantage of that than we are. Not only are we under construction, as I said, we're clearing environmental statewide, and we're going to go hard at those dollars. And that is a pot that is designed to move this thing forward. And I'm looking forward to playing in all these pots, but particularly, I can't overemphasize how important that Build Back Better, that $10 billion program is. We did very well on the high-speed rail pot in 2008, 9, and 10, and we intend to do very well here. And so it's a great opportunity for California.
Gwen, just 2 other comments. I don't know if Brian, one of your pots of money, but energy got an enormous amount of money also and there's no greener, cleaner technology than what you all are building in California. And I'm sure you're looking at those pots of money also. And yep. Gwen, let me just reemphasize something I said earlier. The 10 billion was passed in the House with strong support from Speaker Pelosi, from President Biden and his team at the White House, and by Leader Schumer. And that's why we feel optimistic that when a bill passes Congress that is clean, green legislation or transportation, we believe there will be a pot of money, hopefully 10 billion, for high-speed rail, and California will benefit.
Thank you. I think we're going to do one last question, and then I'll turn it to everybody to give a few closing remarks. Brian, can you share a little bit? I think this question's come up in the chat too. Why the decision was made to build in the valley first?
Yeah. Now 15 years ago, yes. I would say this, that California, looking back at it, we applied for, I think, 4 different segments around the state that for possible federal funding. And I think there was an emphasis at that time from our federal partner to focus some of these dollars at the place it would make the most impact. And so I think the fact that the Central Valley was a highly economically disadvantaged area of the state, that it had very acute air quality issues. I think those were some of the driving of the 4 applications that we applied for that again were around the state. Ultimately, that was the one that was awarded. And I do think it had to do with the idea that it could have the most impact on a community that kind of needed it the most. And it was an essential part of what we're ultimately building. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, you can start on either end, or you start in the middle and work out. And the choice was to start in the middle and work out. And I think those were some of the driving reasons. Leanne may have an additional memory of that I don't know, but I know those were some of the factors that went into the decision. And we put that money to work as quickly as we could. And, the upside of that has been very important economic development in the Valley. Of the $8.5 billion or so that we've spent, we've had about 12 or 13 billion in economic output. We've created 70,000 plus jobs with the money we've invested so far, and more will come as we go forward. And each day, we see about 1,000 workers out on those construction sites, and we expect that to grow as the construction ramps up into the next year. So, Leanne, I don't know.
Gwen, I would also say that we should make note of the fact that right after the bill passed, sometime mid 2009, I was in San Francisco with then Mayor Newsom, Speaker Pelosi, Senator Feinstein, and a lot of rail enthusiasts to announce $450 million in San Francisco for Transbay. So, all of the money didn't go to the central part of the state. We allocated $450 million in San Francisco, and that shouldn't go unnoticed.
No, that's right.
Secretary LaHood, you have an impeccable memory. I am so impressed that you can still recall these facts. I'm quite jealous.
Amount, right? The exact
And
amount.
the exact amount. Exactly.
If I could just add quickly
Really?
to Brian's answer. Yes, absolutely. When the federal government was looking at where to put their money, they certainly looked at the issues in the Valley, and that it would make a huge impact, that influx of money into the Valley. They also looked at, this was never going to be just a Northern California or just a Southern California train. It was going to go from north to south. It was always going to go through the Valley. And starting in the Valley, you could go either way from there. Once they started looking at expanding out of the Valley, and it was going to take a little time to decide which direction that was going to go for the next section. The other piece, in addition, it also looked at, if you need to test that track, you can't test it going up over the mountains. You have to have some flat area to be able to test a train going 220 miles an hour. And guess what? The only place you can do that is that Central Valley of California. And so I think when you add all of those things together, it was definitely decided that the Central Valley was the only place really to start the project.
Gwen, I just want to say one other word about the fact that none of this would have happened without Congressman Jim Costa. He has been a dreamer, a planner, an innovator, an implementer for this project from the beginning. He's never wavered, even under enormous criticism. And he's been a stalwart on this. And we couldn't have accomplished what has been accomplished in California without Congressman Jim Costa.
No question.
Thank you, Congressman. All right, we are at time, so we'll do a lightning round closing remarks. I'll start with you, Brian.
Well, thank you to the Bay Area Council, to Secretary LaHood, Leanne, Darlene, and everybody for the opportunity to talk about the project. Again, the challenges are well documented of the past, and my job on a daily basis is to turn away from the challenges of the past and really toward the opportunities of today and tomorrow. And the opportunities are immense. And so we've got a budget that is sizable going forward. We're putting those resources to work to complete the construction, to complete the environmental work, and to get us prepared to build the system that we promised the voters. And it's going to take time. It's going to take ongoing effort. As I said, and as Secretary LaHood laid out, there's all kinds of opportunity here and before us, and we should not turn back. This is the right investment for the future of California. It's the right investment in the era of climate change. and I've been doing transportation policy for 27 years, and it's the single investment I've ever seen that checks all the policy boxes that we want to achieve when we invest transportation dollars: economics, environment, mobility. And so, again, I'm pleased to be here. I'm happy to dedicate myself to advancing this, and I welcome everybody's assistance and help. So thank you.
Thank you. Secretary LaHood, a few
Well,
closing
I'm
thoughts.
delighted to have participated and represent the HighSpeed Rail Coalition and my other co-chairs and the entire staff for being behind what you're all doing and supporting it and trying to be helpful. I want to give a big shout out to Governor Brown for his vision, and equally Governor Newsom for continuing that vision, to the leadership of the California Assembly for all that you've done. I want to give a shout out to the congressional delegation for the support for continued funding for this project, and everyone should know that there is no stopping California high-speed rail. There just isn't. It's going to go forward, and my advice is get on board. The train has left the station, and there's no stopping it. Thank you.
Thank you. Darlene, some closing thoughts to share with us.
Yes, just quickly, thank you for letting me be here this morning. I would just like to reiterate my urging that the private sector, the business groups, the members of Bay Area Council, refresh their enthusiasm and commitment to high-speed rail. Here at Bay Area Council, we spend so many hours talking about transportation, housing, climate, economy, so many things that are so important. And just as Brian said, high-speed rail checks almost all those boxes in terms of helping our state. So I urge all of you to consider joining the High-Speed Rail Coalition, urging our state legislature to pass that $4.2 billion that we need, and to do everything you can to refresh your support for such an important project.
Thank you. And Leanne, closing thoughts for us.
Sure. And I'm so excited that we're all here together again to talk about this important project, because sometimes when we start looking at all of the things that have to happen in California for us all to prosper, we forget to talk about some of the most important things, which is economic vitality for the entire state. High-speed rail has always been that promise of making sure, when we talk about equity, when we talk about diversifying our economy, high-speed rail has always been that promise to do that. And I know right now it's so exciting because the stars, I think, have aligned when we're talking about federal funds, we're talking about state funds. We have a president in the White House. We have a governor in Sacramento who is refocused on high-speed rail. We have a president that they call him Railroad Joe. He certainly is looking at how do we ensure that there's enough money in this country to be who we should be? And as I said, as I travel around the world and I see how many of our countries have high-speed rail, and I come back to the United States and say, what the heck? Well, we have nothing. And California is absolutely that place that has to start. We are those innovators. We are the go-to state when people are looking at where we need to go. Once we get it up and running, the rest of the country will follow suit. But we need to make this happen, and we need to make it happen going forward. And I know the coalition is working hard, and Brian is the right person sitting in that chair to move us forward. And so I'm hoping, and you all will join me 5 years from now, we'll come back and say, boy, that was a great ride when we got on that train. Thank you.
I will definitely be on that train with you. I look forward to the invitation. Yeah. Thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much to everybody who joined and for your thoughtful questions in the chat. And we will see you at our next Bay Area Impact webinar on the 30th on the Bay Area economy and inflation. Take care, everybody.